Hello and welcome back. Just a small reminder, in this series of lessons we are making a 3D game ready character from scratch, and in this lesson we will be packing the UV patches which we have unwrapped over the course of previous several lessons. If we take any element here, just to remind you, and open the UV editor, we are inside 3ds Max right now, we will see that the patches here are in complete disarray, and the same is true for pretty much every other element. They're all unwrapped and nothing is packed. But important question to ask ourselves, again, before we start packing things, is how we want to split this character. Basically, how many texture sets do we want to have for this character? And ideally, well, not ideally, but a simplest way would be to have a single map for all the elements. So we just have one shader and we apply it to the entire character and it just all works. But rare situation, well, not rare, but a situation where we might want to have several texture sets is when we have an element which uses different set of textures than the other elements. And in this character, this element are these blades. Well, the blades are plural, but the element itself is a simplification, so it's just a single element. The image of blades will be baked onto it. This here, just to remind you, these are the blades in question, and this is the element those blades will be projected on. And the difference between this element and the rest of the character is in that the blades representation will require an alpha map, a transparency map, to show this the silhouette of the blades. Having an alpha map would be the simplest way to approach this, or at least we so think. That will be an experiment, but in any case we will be using an alpha map for this element, while for the rest of the character alpha map will not be required. So it would be reasonable to split them. So basically we'll have a set of maps for the whole character minus the blades and for the blades. So for now it will be okay to just hide this element so that we don't have to worry about it. And by the way, note that the unwrapping of this inner rim was not covered in the previous lessons. We covered everything but this element, but this element is very straightforward. It's pretty much it unwraps the same as the outer rim, only simpler. So I decided not to cover that. So basically we have everything unwrapped, and what we will do right now is we will collapse this geometry. This is a special operation inside 3ds Max, which merges all the elements into a single mesh. Before we are going to do that, we'll just save just in case. So collapse, and now it is a single mesh. And if we apply unwrap modifier, what we will see is this mess. It's a complete mess. But it is very easy to fix if we go to, let's say, polygons, select all the polygons, tools, and pack UVs. Fill hosts, rotate clusters, and there we go. 3ds Max does it very quickly, but not always ideally. Because when we are unwrapping something like that, a character like this, it is important not just, and it scales, each element here is scaled relative to its surface area in the 3D space, but it is not always the best way. Scale individual patches, because what matters is not the relative scale, but rather the importance of a specific area for the character. Like the frontal part here is quite important. Therefore, it probably would make sense to give it more surface area on the map, right? So let's scale it up a little bit. the bottom part of the body of the drone will be seldom seen, very rarely, and usually only glimpses of it will be seen, so it makes sense to scale it down a little bit. The inner rim is just plain not very important because it is usually covered, especially the inner part of it. So we'll scale that down. All this is done in an attempt to free as much space for important parts as possible. Okay, let's repack it briefly, but this time without rescaling. Something like that. Right. The front part of the claw, I would say, is probably more important than the back part of the claw. So I will scale the back part while scaling the front part up a little bit. The back part I scaled down, the front part a little bit up. Upscaled it. What else? Okay, the outer rim seems to take a reasonable amount of space. What is this? These areas will be mostly covered, like you can see here. We can scale them down. You have to be careful and not to create too much difference in scale, because that way you might make the seams more visible. So we're not going crazy with this. We're not scaling it way down, just slightly. Okay, I'll keep the scale of these elements. Well, maybe I can scale this down a tiny bit and this as well. Not very important elements, and they are partially hidden. Same for the rings. The rings which are facing us are more important than those which are not, and the inside surface of the rings again is not as important as the because the inner part of the ring of any given ring will be mostly hidden. Not mostly, completely hidden actually. So we can safely scale that down. What else can we optimize? Let's take a look. These elements, cylindrical elements, they are already pretty small. So they are covered almost completely by the handles, but we will scale things, these unnecessary things down more if we need it, if we realize that after packing, and let's start the packing, we need more space. The packing inside 3ds Max is pretty good, but it is not perfect, and you have to really be watching that the parts don't get too close to one another. That can create issues. And in Maya, for instance, and I used to pack things, pack UV maps in Maya, because in Maya it is a much more complicated and more flexible algorithm, and if you give it enough time, it will create a very, very tightly packed. But for our purposes, it is rarely needed. Here, for instance, the hole is. It's hard for 3ds Max to figure out that this hole is a free area where you can pack smaller things, but we can do it manually. So I'm trying to make things rely on automatic packing as much as I can, but not too much, because then, well, it's a better practice. The best practice is to use a combination of manual and automatic packing. You start with automatic, and then you just fine-tune things. And again, I'm not going for perfect results here, and it is important when it comes just to our pipeline in general. We are not going for, on this project, we are not going for super clean topology. We are not going for the most efficient use of texture space, because it is not super important here. The important is the appeal of a given character and the time we spend, the amount of time we spend tinkering with it. What it looks on the screen is what really matters. The rest is secondary. And I think this unwrapping is good enough. It is good enough, tight enough. almost all the texture space is used, and note that all the long patches, since they were cut, like the rims here, the turbine rims, they were cut in the middle, therefore it allowed for a tighter packed UVs, and that's good. So now let's unhide everything to select our propeller, and since it's just one element, we'll just pack it automatically. It is one element, but it's very hard to tell which part of the propeller is more important, because actually we will be seeing both the underbelly of the propeller and the top part probably equally. Here it is safe to just use automatic packing and just leave it at that. So that is it. It will be a smaller map for the propeller, something like 1K, and 2K for the rest of the character, probably something like that. So in the next lesson we will be covering the basics of Substance Painter, the application that we will use for baking maps. And after that we will be running our first baking tests of the actual character.